We are going to go over coding the miscues in your Try It Out. At this point, you have listened to a story on vacation, you've completed a running record, and you've watched a video to see my running record of the same book. We are going to now code the mistakes that our reader made and then look at the recommendations for instructing this student later on after this reading. Let's go. Our reader started instruction on page 3, and on page 3 she made 3 total errors, and they all came in the last line. Now 2 of those errors came from the name Anna. And just a little disclaimer, when we have a name in a story, if you don't prep the student for the name, that's fine, but we only count that error one time out of the entire text. So technically this would only be one mistake, but what we see is she did go back and correct it. She figured it out. And she does make the same mistake later on in the reading. So I did end up counting one mistake total for the name for the entire book. But the first time we see is right here for the word Anna. She said and she said and come, and then she said and again here. So we noted that. And then if you look at our line, she went all the way back and reread because it didn't make sense. So what we see here in our coding area is she had 2 mistakes where she said and for Anna, and she had 1 mistake where she said come for comes. So saying and for Anna is a visual mistake. They look similar. And saying come for comes is also visual. They look very, very similar. But we found that when she went back and reread, she was able to put it all together. And that, in that case, it was really because the grammar or the structure of the sentence, and also for come, the meaning of the sentence. And so we see her making those changes because of the structure and meaning. Moving on to page 4, she said ask for asks, and so that was just a mistake. It still sounded correct visually and structurally. She just didn't look at the ending on the word. She never self-corrected that mistake. Then she said y'all for call. Although it sounds strange, it was a visual error because it has the same back. She just didn't look at the front of the word. And then she said yell, and then she went back here and repeated. And when she repeated, she put it all together, and she used the visual and the structure and the meaning of the sentence to do that. The same is true where she said grandma for Grammy. When she reread it, she looked at the ending, so she looked much more visually. Even though grandma and Grammy, structurally and based on the context or the meaning, are the same, she had to really look at the end of the word, so visual would be her self-correction. In our next line, we see does not for doesn't, and that's a simple mistake. She never corrected that. Does not looks visually the same. I did not mark visual, though. If you see, I marked structure and meaning, because of course does not and doesn't does not change the grammar or the meaning of the sentence. But visually, she was not reading it as a contraction. Part of that is because she's just learning to read contractions, and sometimes she reads them as the 2 separate words, so we're working on that. She also read grandmother for grandma, and then visually looked at it and said, wait, that's not grandmother, that's grandma. When we move to page 5, we see she said your for our. And although they're different words, they visually look the same, and structurally they make sense. But when she went back, and we see right here this line means she went back, that she fixed it, and so she was looking even more visually. The same thing with grandma and Grammy. She was looking even more visually. And then she said visit for very, and visually they start with the same letter, but she read on and realized that didn't make sense, so she came back and fixed that using the structure and the meaning of the sentence. Now we also had this error. I'm going to circle this error because it's a little different. This is actually not an error, but when she got to the word Grammys, she noticed it was different, and we saw her go grrr. and then do Grammys. So I did put she self-corrected, but I didn't count it as an error because really she was just slowly stretching out the word. Those are one of those mistakes that if you want to make notation of, you may. It's not an error, but it gives you some information as the teacher. The other thing she did is the first time she read this, she read do not for don't. But then the first time she read don't. The second time when she reread it with Grammys correctly, she said do not. I didn't count the mistake because she read it correctly the first time. But again, I know as her teacher that I would be working on those contractions because we saw that up here. She wasn't real consistent with the contraction reading as well. So it's not really an error, but we do want to pay attention to that in our instruction next time. On page 5, we had a few mistakes. Let me just grab the right highlighter. All right, she said again, your for our, and she said grandma for Grammy, just like she did on the previous page. And again, both of those words work, but when we look more carefully, she again is looking more visually at the words. Actually, we did page 5. This picture has both. I'm sorry. You should have already known that because we went through that. Let's skip down to page 6. Sorry about that. This is where we have the told for Anna. I just went in and jumped ahead and whispered the word Anna to her when it got to the name. It counts as a mistake when you do that, but she was not familiar with the spelling of that name, and so I just wanted to keep her fluency going. So that's one mistake. We see that she did do a repeat here to figure out the word phone. The repeat's fine. They can repeat as many times as they want. And actually, the word phone, you don't have to count as a mistake. I did put it in here and said she was really visually looking at the word. Visual is not a way that you can guess that word, though. And so when she went back and reread, and she looked at the picture, I was watching her, she looked at the picture, and we saw that she was using the structure and the meaning of the picture and the sentence to figure out the word phone. And she really kind of determined that P didn't matter. Moving on, for the word share. First she said sare, and then she said say, then she said shar, then she said shh, and then she went back and she reread, and then she said say again. And so I know she knows that word isn't say, but say made sense with the structure and the meaning of the sentence. Now I'm going to say what Grammy said. So that makes sense. So she just kept going, and that was okay, but it counts as an error. And then again, we did grandma for Grammy, and she fixed it using that visual cue. She said when for then. And if you've noticed, a lot of times she's not looking at that first letter. We had the our and the your mistake. We had the all and the call mistake. And we had this when and then. Her eyes jump to the back of words still, and she is, although she's much more advanced at reading than her age, her eyes still look at that logographic print where she sees words in chunks still. She's kind of one of those weird students that can read much, much more advanced than what maybe her brain processes. She's still processing more simply, but she's ahead in her reading. So we see these kind of errors, but she has good enough reading strategies. After she says them, she fixes them. So we saw that. Again, we saw this, your for our. So these words are making sense, and they look visually almost the same, but when she's self-correcting, she's putting all the pieces together. So we have then you'll know just how cool our Grammy really is instead of your Grammy. But you can see it really doesn't change the sentence meaning. On our last page, she was trucking along. She did a little repeat here. Then she got to these two words, special vacation. And she sounded out special. So we ended up, it was an error because she did it so slowly. She was only looking visually, but then when she started thinking about it, she used the context and the meaning there. Vacation, she stretched out visually again, right here. But we see when she self-corrected, she was really thinking about the structure and the meaning. What was my book about? Now, I probably shouldn't have said, what's our book about? But that gave her a little bit of a clue that got her, thinking again about what was going on. Now, if we look down at the bottom, we have done some calculations. So first of all, we see if you add up her mistakes, she had 19. Well, that's a little bit too much, isn't it? She had 19 mistakes, and within those 19 mistakes, she fixed 15 of them. Okay, so that's her self-correction number. To find out a student's accuracy rate, you take the number of words total, and it said that at the top. There was 139. And then we take the number of errors, and she had 4 total errors because we take the 19 right here minus the 15 she fixed, and she had 4 errors. And then you divide that by the number of words. So it ends up being 135 divided by 139, and that gives us a 97% accuracy rate. So she was accurate on 97% of the words. Even though she had 19 mistakes, she fixed 15 of them. She wasn't very fluent because of these mistakes, but again, that guides you on what you're going to be working on with her. 97% is above 95%, so she's independent in this book. She can read this book on her own. This is not the book that you would instruct her in. To figure out the self-correction rate over here, you take the number of errors, and that she had 4 errors, and then we add them to our self-correction, number of self-corrections, and then you divide by the self-corrections, and it comes out, it's really close to 1-to-1. Out of 19 errors, she fixed 15. So it's somewhere in between 1 out of every 2 words she fixes. It's actually 1 out of every 1 point something. So in this case, we know she's self-correcting a lot, and that's good. We want them thinking about, does it look right, does it sound right, does it make sense? And that's how you do a running record and you calculate it. From here, I'd like you to think, what are some recommendations you would have for instructing this student? What are areas that you would work on with this student, and what level of book would you put her in? Remember, she's 97% accurate at a level I. You're going to post those recommendations on a Padlet board on the next slide.